Hello students, it's Ms. Fulton here to talk to you about the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. So we're going to start with the nitrogen cycle. Flip to that page in your notes booklet, and remember you can pause the video at any time if I go too fast. So the nitrogen cycle starts in the atmosphere. The biggest reservoir of nitrogen, reservoir here means where nitrogen is stored long term. The biggest reservoir of nitrogen is in the atmosphere as a gas, and you know it's diatomic, so it's N2. Nitrogen gas in the atmosphere is in a form that can't be used by animals or plants. So before it can be used by animals or plants, nitrogen has to become fixed through a process called nitrogen fixation. So this is the process of turning nitrogen in the atmosphere into a compound called nitrates. This is largely done by lightning. So lightning that gives the energy to separate the two nitrogen atoms and then combines it with 3 oxygen atoms to become nitrates. So this is NO3. Nitrates can refer also to compounds that contain nitrate. So nitrates are absorbed by plant roots and used to make proteins that are eaten by animals. Nitrogen can also be fixed by some plants. So bacteria on the roots of some plants, like beans and peas, can also fix nitrogen from nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. So this is an example of mutualism. Those are bacteria nodules, meaning little clusters of bacteria that give the plant nitrogen, and in turn they take some sugar from the roots of the plant. So once you have nitrates in the soil, they are assimilated by the plant. So that means that the plant takes up nitrates and uses them in their proteins and their DNA. And then animals get their nitrogen from eating plants or from eating animals that have eaten plants. Okay, so this is assimilation. Once that animal or plant dies, or when it excretes waste, the nitrogen from the wastes and dead organisms is turned into ammonium by bacteria, and that's called ammonification. Soil bacteria can change ammonium back into nitrites. Nitrite is NO2. It can't be used by the plant yet, but luckily soil bacteria can turn nitrites into nitrates and complete nitrification this way. So nitrification is the process of going ammonium to nitrite and then nitrite to nitrate. And then that starts this little cycle again where it goes back to the plant. Some soil bacteria also break down nitrates and they release nitrogen gas back to the atmosphere. That process is called denitrification. So if you turn to the next page of your notes package, there are 2 diagrams here that can help you picture the nitrogen cycle. The top one is quite a simple one, and then the bottom one adds in a little bit more detail. But it's important to note also that the reservoirs of nitrogen don't hold on to nitrogen for a very long time. So the atmosphere, as I said, is the biggest reservoir of nitrogen, but nitrogen is also stored in the soil and in plants and animals, but it doesn't stick around very long. The other thing to note is, like I said, the atmosphere is the major reservoir of nitrogen. This diagram down here also includes some processes that are human activities. So your printout is in black and white. So I highlighted the things that are human activities. So when humans burn fossil fuels, it can put nitrogen in the form of nitrates into the air, and then this is often absorbed by raindrops, and this rains down onto the ground where it can get into the soil. We also can produce ammonia as a waste of burning fossil fuels, and that can get into the soil. Humans also add nitrogen to synthetic or chemical fertilizer. So when fertilizer seeps into the soil or waterways, that is also adding nitrates to the nitrogen cycle. Turn over once more to see the phosphorus cycle. You have a diagram of it up top with some steps, but I'm going to go through these as well. It's important to note that the major reservoirs of phosphorus in the phosphorus cycle are rock and sediments that contain phosphorus-bearing minerals. There's no atmospheric component in the phosphorus cycle, so phosphorus is never in a gas form. The limitations this imposes on the return of phosphorus from the ocean to land make phosphorus naturally scarce in aquatic and many terrestrial ecosystems. So in undisturbed ecosystems, phosphorus is the limiting factor in biological systems, which means that phosphorus, or a lack of phosphorus, is what is preventing plants from growing and animals from being able to support large populations. Phosphorus is a limiting factor. So let's get into this cycle. So first of all, where are we getting phosphorus from in the phosphorus cycle? So phosphorus is mostly in rocks, stored in sedimentary rocks. So this is exposed when wind and rain weather rocks. They release phosphate, so PO4 3-. Phosphate is dissolved in rainwater and carried into nearby soils and bodies of water through runoff. And then synthetic or human sources, we also mine phosphate minerals. So we go into those rocks and dig up phosphate-containing minerals. And we add this to synthetic fertilizers and also detergents. So here is weathering. So we have these rocks on a mountain. Wind and rain break them down and put phosphate into the soil or into the water. There's a little picture of a mine here. So when we take phosphorus in the form of phosphate out of the rocks, we can put it in cleaners, and then that ends up in our wastewater, which in Vancouver is not treated for chemical pollution, so it just goes right back into the ocean. We also put it in fertilizer, and then that ends up on farms and can, through runoff, end up in waterways through that. Assimilation means taking up this compound. So phosphorus is absorbed by plant roots and assimilated into tissues. The main reason we need phosphorus in our bodies is for the molecule ATP, which if you've taken biology, you will remember that ATP is how our bodies store chemical energy for us to use. Animals, again, get phosphorus from plants. And then when there's animal waste or plant matter or other biomass or dead organisms, they're broken down by decomposers in the soil or bacteria in the soil, and it returns phosphate to the soil. So we get this little cycle just like in the nitrogen cycle where we're going soil to plants to animals, back to soil. Lastly, I want to talk about sedimentation and geologic uplift. So phosphate doesn't really dissolve that well in water. So when it gets into the waterways through runoff, it forms a solid and it can sink to the bottom as sediment. And this process is called sedimentation. So you have your phosphorus washing into this waterway and it's over time going to sink down. And then the pressure of all that water on top of it is going to compress those sediments into sedimentary rock. And now we have this rock containing phosphorus at the bottom of the ocean. When tectonic plates collide and they form mountains, new rock is going to start sticking up and being exposed to the weathering from the wind and rain, and that essentially starts our cycle again. So as we get these mountains rising, you have new rock face exposed, and it's coming from the ocean floor up into mountains, and then wind and water is going to wear it down, start our cycle again, and have phosphate that can enter the soil or waterways. Key ideas to remember about phosphorus is that the phosphorus cycle is very slow. So phosphorus spends a long time in rocks and sediments. Also, remember there's no atmospheric component of the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is never a gas in the air. This is another reason why it's a very slow process, because it takes a long time for those rocks to get weathered. And in most ecosystems, plant growth is limited by the lack of phosphorus. Therefore, when we give them phosphorus, plants and algae grow really quickly. So this is why we add fertilizer to our plants. Fertilizer contains carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in some proportion. So the phosphorus especially helps our plants grow more quickly. I hope that helps. If not, ask me questions in class and I would love to explain it some more. Thank you.